Every woodworker should get one. An apprentice. You don't have to pay them. You don't have to reward them. They come through the door all shiny and hopeful, completely ignorant of what's in store. You get to work them. You get to work them non-stop with the most boring, repetitive, menial task, and you treat them rough. If they complain about the work or the abuse, you just shove more work on them and put them in their place. If they upset you, then it is perfectly acceptable in this day and age to curse at them until they are on the brink of tears. Even beating on them a little is acceptable. These guys are born for this kind of treatment. They're real ruffians. And at the end of a hard day's work, you don't even have to be appreciative. Just point them to their sleeping bunk underneath the table and leave them in the dark, knowing full well tomorrow's another hard day of monotonous work. But I warn you, after a half-decade or so of this kind of abuse, they might start acting up a little. Might take a little more effort getting them through their job. And likely quality is going to slack off no matter how much you curse or beat on them. When you get to this point, my suggestion, throw them a bone. Give them a little hope that their poor, miserable lives are going to get a little easier, no matter how delusional that fact is. When you get to this point, do what I'm doing. Give your thickness planer a new set of blades. Like most hand tool-centric woodworkers, I turn to what I call my electric apprentices occasionally. You see, there are just some things that are exceptionally repetitive, boring, and take way too long to accomplish. Dimensioning rough lumber is one of those tasks. Hence, I am thankful I have access to a bandsaw and thickness planer because it opens up an entire world of wood available in the rough. Sizes that I can mold into my desired shape with grading movement of my choosing. And the wood's cheaper. Now, I have to admit that I disdain using my thickness planer. It's loud, messy, and has gotten cantankerous over the years. You see, I've been using this thing for going on 5 years now. Who knows how long Dad used it before me. Over that time, I've noticed lines starting to show up in the finish as the blades have gotten chipped. I've noticed the noise level has increased from unbearable to deafening. And the wood is not being drawn through as easily because the friction of the dull blades is pushing it back. My final straw was when they actually started burning the wood because the blades were so dull they acted more like sandpaper. I'd put off changing the blades way too long. This was due to equal parts disdain for the planer, laziness, and ignorance of how to actually do it because the owner's manual had walked off long ago. On just the mechanical side, I pictured a huge amount of an adjustment to get the blades back perfectly positioned, and I didn't know how much the blades would cost. So to the internet I went, and what I read calmed my nerves. First off, no need to purchase blades because each one of them had been sharpened on both sides, so all I had to do was flip it. Second, it looked fairly simple, and the tools required were actually attached to the machine. So, here I go. Let's see about changing the blades on this lunchbox planer. Now, the first step after disconnecting the machine in the instructions, it says to remove the two top covers. And that's it. It doesn't tell you how to remove them. How much more effort would it have taken them to just say, by lifting up, so that idiotic people like me, don't waste their time and get frustrated looking for some screw, a clamp, a lever to release so the top will pop off. Sometimes when you're dealing with machines, you just have to bang on them to figure them out. Now, the next two steps are fairly simple and common sense. It says raise the head assembly to 4 inches on the scale just so it's up out of the way, and remove the 2 screws to pull the cutter head guard out. This is the little black thing that kind of guides the chips as it leaves the machine. The next step doesn't make much sense to me. It says pull the guard down to gain access to the hex hole on the side of the cutter head. You can pull this down, insert the little key they have, and twist it, and it will rotate the blades around. But according to these instructions, at one point it should stop and lock. it never did on me. It didn't really matter in the end, but it just kind of bugs me that the instructions aren't correct. Now, as you're spinning the cutter head, it does give you a good chance to look and see how this machine actually works. You see the blade, you see a little scoop underneath it so that the chips are going to flip out and come around. And then the blade is actually attached by what looked to me like a chip breaker. It's screwed on all the way across. Coincidentally, the next step is to remove those screws. Now, coming from a motorcycle mechanic background, I do know that when you loosen up a long thing like this, it is kind of important how you loosen it up. Always start in the middle and work your way out so that it releases the tension evenly. And when you're reassembling stuff, alternate sides with the screws so that the tension is clamped down evenly and don't tighten it up all the way, but we'll get to that later. The next step was removing the blade. Now they give you this little magnetic clamp thing. One side was more magnetized than the other, but it's a cool little tool to lift it off. One of the blades was kind of stuck on with sawdust, and I just used my thumb and just brushed it up a little bit, making sure I didn't go sideways so I didn't cut myself to get the blade off. Now here's one thing in the instructions they didn't tell you. Underneath that chip breaker are some springs. And when I took the first blade out, I pulled the chip breaker off and set it aside. And then when I rotated around, the springs kind of fell out. And I didn't even know where they went. Luckily, the other side is an exact duplicate. So as I slowly took off the chip breaker, I could see where those springs went. After you get the chip breaker off and you use a little magnetic tool to lift the blade out, basically you just flip it around and put it back down. Now, I was really worried about getting these alignments correct. But what I found out is the blade itself has holes in it that go on these pins, and the pins are fairly tight. There's like a 1/4 millimeter slack. I'm guessing that it's accurate enough. That much on a rough planing tool like this for me is not that big a deal. So from here, you just kind of reverse the procedure. Put the chip breaker back down and put those two springs on the outside holes. And then using the center screw first, would tighten up the screws going outward so that the pressure was even. Then you just reassemble everything in reverse order. All that's left to do now is test it out and see if you did a good job. Now, when all said is done, I am surprised it took me this long to do this. It wasn't that hard a task. They gave you the tools that you used. It took maybe 20 minutes of me fumbling around and even filming at the same time. This is one of those things that when you're done, you realize the engineers that build these things understand that woodworkers are nincompoops sometimes. They aren't going to make a common task such as swapping out your blade overly difficult. They design it to be somewhat idiot-proof. So trust that the engineers knew what they were doing a little bit, though I do wish they would write the instructions better. End result is this planer is now a lot quieter. It doesn't bog, the wood doesn't stop being fed through, and the boards come out a lot nicer. I'd say this thing's ready for years more abuse. Now, if you don't have this exact model, don't worry. Most of them are as simple. So, get out there and change some blades. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and tell your friends. And always remember, it's always worth the effort to learn, create, and share with others. Be safe and have fun.